We're going to have an interview today with Geneva Jensen Borrowman. First of all, Mom, when were you born?
January the 5th, 1918.
Where were you born?
Well, Rexburg is where the post office was, but it wasn't Burton. It was about 7 miles west of Rexburg, and there was a ward there.
Tell us a little bit about your family.
I was a fourth child in a family of 7, which put me right in the middle. And I have 3 older brothers, Emery, Arthur, and Leonard. Younger is Preston, and then Jeanette and Hardy.
What was life like in northeastern, well, not northeastern Idaho, but eastern Idaho in that time? Anything come to mind?
Oh, surely.
The contrast with today?
Oh, yes, lots of things. They had cars, but not a lot of them, and we used to go to. We did it all with the horses and the buggy, our wagons.
You did the farming that way?
The farming, yes. And we go to church in the buggy. And our neighbor, who lived about a mile, about 2.5 miles away, would come past our place with a surrey with a fringe on top.
Is that right?
And Mother and Dad would come in there, so us kids would run out and ride to church in the surrey.
I see. That was pretty classy, huh?
Even at that time, that was classy. There would be lots of, there was the hitching rail outside the church for people to tie up their horses and the wagons. There must have been some cars, but I don't remember the cars when I was right little.
Do you remember what was the first car you remember coming into the area?
Oh, there must have been. They were around all the time, but I remember the first car that Dad and Uncle Wilford bought. They had this farm, and they were partners, and it was a Model A Ford truck.
Oh, I see.
Not a Model A, it had to be a Model T. It's a Model T Ford truck. Then the next one I remember was a Model T touring car, and it had the isinglass windows. But you went without any windows, and then you put on these, they fit on, but inside of them they had an isinglass window.
Now, what does icing mean?
Isinglass?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's what you see in obsidian.
Mica?
Mica. Mm-hmm.
Oh, rather than real glass, huh?
It didn't have real glass in it. It had the mica, sort of a celluloid, which is plastic-like substance in it.
Now, how long did you stay at Rexburg, or in the Burton area?
We moved when I was 10.
Okay, so your father was in farming prior to that, or?
Yes, all the time. And at one time, before I remember, they had 160 acres, and it was good land. And then they sold it and kept only 10 acres with the house and went up on the dry farms east of Rexburg. Had a lot of dry years, and the bank closed and foreclosed on them, so lots of financial problems.
Huh.
Had they kept the 160 acres, we would have been well off all the time.
Is that right?
Oh, surely. It was good hayland. The people they sold it to didn't ever build a house on it. They were the Waltzes, and they lived on a mile and a half the other way, but they came down and farmed it. It was just good land.
So that was a mistake, probably?
I feel so. I feel like that.
Who was behind that decision, or?
Oh, Uncle Wilford liked the dry farms.
So he wanted to move up there.
That's how I understand.
Now, just recently, on October 23rd, we celebrated your mom's 100th birthday. What do you remember of your mom as a little girl?
Well, her hair was dark then. She was heavier than she is now.
Yeah, was she?
I thought of her as being taller. And Mother was always a worker, always. But Dad would go to bed at night, and Dad would get up really, really early in the morning with, and so did Mother, but Dad maybe 5:30 or so. And in the winter he always started the fires.
Uh-huh.
But then he liked to go to bed really early at night. So he'd go to bed and call, "Annie, when are you coming to bed?" Mother would say, "Right now." And he'd go back to sleep, and she'd read and so far into the night.
Huh.
But then she'd still get up early. She had lots of energy.
She was an immigrant from Denmark. Did she tell you any stories when you were little?
About Denmark?
Uh-huh.
Yes, and a few Danish words. And I remember the first time in my life I saw my mother cry was when her mother died. And I wanted to say I was 12, but I wasn't, because we were living in Rexburg. We were living out there in Burton. and we moved when I was 10. So I must have been about 8. And she got the letter in the mail, and the letter was etched in black.
Oh.
And in those days, that's what they announced to death. And the letter came, was etched in black, and she cried.
Huh. Because she couldn't go back.
Well, yes. No, she couldn't. We weren't financially able to send her back. In those days, they didn't have airplanes that would cross. There would have been a trip by boat. And by then, Jeanette and Harley, I guess, were both, not Harley because he was just a year older than that, Preston and Jeanette were both born.
Huh.
So she had 6 children.
Now, you have 5 brothers and 1 sister.
Right.
Tell me about each of your brothers.
Emery was, from the time I can remember, one of the things I remember about Emery is that he read Black Beauty to us at night. This was the horse story. And then Emery was always a fusser.
A fusser?
Yes, this, that, and he had a pinto horse, and they called him Pint. This was and he'd been an Indian pony. And he came, Dad and Uncle were coming home from the dry farm, I guess, and they saw this pony, and they were able to purchase it or trade or something. I think they traded for it with the understanding that if Emery didn't like it, they could bring it back.
Uh-huh.
Now, Emery was 3 years older than any of Uncle Wilbur's children, and he sort of, so Emery was, they lived right together and farmed together.
Mm-hmm.
So he took Emery as sort of under his wing. So they came, but Emery loved the pony, and so he kept him. And when we couldn't catch him, we had, what I said, this 10 acres. Good little pony once you got him. Just little, but he was really nice. But it took about 3 people to catch him. And what you'd do is he'd run and you'd get him, and finally you'd work him into the corner, and you'd have oats. You'd work him up into the corner of one, either the north or south side of the 10 acres, and then he'd let you walk right up to him once he saw he was cornered. But until then, he'd try to get away.
Kind of a game, huh?
Oh yes, and when and if he ever decided to, and you didn't ever touch his flanks, because if you did, you were on the ground that fast.
Is that right?
And they called him Pint.
Now, what's happened in
and
Emery's?
He drew horses.
Oh, I see. Emery liked to draw them.
He could draw, and he drew them really well.
What has been, just briefly, his life experience?
Oh, he went into farming, and he didn't learn a trade or a skill. He went into farming and has had a lot of experiences with it out in the Bancroft, Burton area, the Bancroft area, and then out to Calder. And he's still farming.
How many children do he and Thelma have?
6, but then Joanna was married and divorced, and so then they raised her oldest boy, Dwayne J. So
Okay.
7.
Your next oldest brother was Leonard, wasn't it?
Arthur.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about Arthur.
Oh, Arthur was always the steady one, and the one that got up early and worked late, and Arthur didn't talk much. Arthur was like Dad. He didn't ever have much to say, but always. He was a really good worker. And right after Arthur was married, he started in the Boise Pit lumber yard, and then he became manager, and then he moved to Idaho Falls and started his own, and Arthur has always been successful in as far as financially. He's done very well.
Okay, and they have how many children?
They have 7.
Now Leonard.
Well, Leonard was a tease. And yeah, he was. And he used to go out on the, he'd be putting up hay out at Robert's, and Uncle was up on the stack, and it began to get dark, and Uncle would be tired. And Uncle would say, send word out for us to quit. And Leonard would send word back, we'll put in one more load. And then he'd send in the next, everybody was out there, and Uncle would get angry and say, well, if he's going to send those in, I can stack them. And I'd be embarrassed because angry because we were all tired. And in they'd come, and in they'd come. And so he was a terrible tease.
Any special incidents come to mind about Leonard as a young man, or?
Oh, he was good to me.
Was he?
Yeah, really good to me. We always had dances. We were out in Roberts, and it was sort of isolated, and so Dad was president of Mutual, and every night after Mutual we would have a dance. He bought a phonograph. I don't know how, but anyway, he secured the funds to buy a phonograph, and it was a good one for that day, and a lot of records, so we always danced.
One of the stories that you remind me of is Leonard coming and waking you up.
Oh, yes.
Now, who would you sleep out with?
Well,
Kind of recreate the story.
Llewellyn Yeaman, that house right across the street from Mother's place, from where she lives now. And Llewellyn would bring out springs and a mattress that her folks stored up in the attic or up in there upstairs, and we would sleep out there all summer long. And it was, how far? 30 yards or so. But we would be sleeping from the road, and he'd walk across the street and say, "Geneva, get up, it's time to come." And I would turn over and ignore him. So he'd just stand at the fence, and he wouldn't raise his voice, or he wouldn't do anything but monotonously say, "Geneva, Geneva, Geneva," on and on and on, and finally, "Get up and go."
Now, in later life, Leonard has... What has he accomplished?
He came down to Pocatello and went to the Votech here as a body and fender man, and worked here in Pocatello a year. And when I was going to college, he every week of the world sent me $5.
Oh, is that right?
The whole time I was in college, he sent me $5 on that, and my rent for the 1 year was $5 a month. And I could depend on that money, and it was really, really nice.
A support.
Yes, and I haven't ever done anything to pay him back, really, but the only time he ever used his, if I didn't write back and tell him I got it, then he would say, "Now look, I need to know if it's coming." And I'm saying a week, but maybe it was a month, because in those days, and then also to go to college, my second year, that would have been my first year, because I lived just off the campus in that rock house. Dad said he didn't see how I could go, and Clifford said, "If she wants to go to college, she's going." So we got in the truck and went down to Idaho Falls, and they got some money from the creamery, from the cream check, to get me into school. But I'd been up working. I'd been up at Rick's, and Ed and I went up and helped with polish some of the furniture and some of these kinds of things to help pay for my tuition. But Uncle Wilford said I could go. So we got some money from the creamery, and then Dad sold his registered bull to Willis Walker. And I don't know how much Willis paid for it, but it must have been around $90, because he came every month that I was at school and would come down to school and give me $10. Then I could go to the cheese factory where Dad and them sold cheese and get cheese and butter. And just walk up there. It was up to the north end of town, and then I'd walk up.
And get your cheese. Now, in later life, Leonard, of course, ran a successful car dealership in Driggs. We're kind of jumping ahead in time, but I'd like you to tell the story of when he was set apart to be a sealer in the Idaho Falls Temple.
Yes, I wasn't there, but he called me, and he came down. Mother was staying with us, and he came down and got Mother, and he didn't say anything about it. He just came and said he was here to take her home. They called first, and so he took her, and then the next day he was to go to the temple to be set apart as a sealer. And at that time they were changing the Idaho Falls Temple presidency, and he knew President Groberg, was it? Was he one of the presidents?
He was the president.
He was the president. All right, Leonard knew President Groberg, and he had also met Mother. And Leonard had been a worker in the temple, so he knew him well. And, he knew Leonard well. And Leonard then asked Mother to go along with him. And Arthur, who is a sealer, was also there, and Harley, who's the state president, was there. And I think the state presidents from around the area had been invited, if I'm getting the story right. And Brother Groberg, President Kimball came to set the new presidency apart. And Brother Groberg asked President Kimball if he would like to meet a young 99-year-old woman. And President Kimball said yes, so they introduced Mother. And then President Kimball asked if Mother would like a blessing. And she then went forward and sat. And received the blessing from President Kimball, and they invited Arthur and Harley to stand and Leonard to stand also.
President Murray G. Romney was also in attendance, wasn't he?
Well, I think he was.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I believe.
Quite a story. Coming back, so we've talked about Emery, Arthur, Leonard. You're the fourth. Next was Preston. Tell us about Preston.
Oh, I always thought Preston was a good-looking one of the family. And Preston was easygoing. He was more like Arthur. He was easygoing. He was the younger brother, and he loved to ride horses. He loved horses. Like Emery, he stayed in farming. Emery loved horses. They both stayed in farming. Preston was, he was just a nice brother.
Tell us some about his experience in the war. He was something of a hero, as I understand.
His group, his division. When he went into the service, he went into the army, and he went into the cavalry, and they still had mules that did some of the work, and we have pictures of him on that. And then he was in one of what they call the Texas Rangers, and he was down in Texas and trained, and then he went to not Vietnam, where he went to the Philippines.
Oh.
He was stationed in New Guinea. And they went into, he was in Miami, I guess, some of the time, but then he went to down in New Guinea. And the Japanese had taken over a lot of the men, and they had a prison camp there called Cabantuan. And the Rangers went in and released the prisoners. And Preston was one of the leaders, and in the article that came out in the Saturday Evening Post and in the journal, this kind of thing, it did show the picture of this other fellow, but Preston was on one of the other, at one of the other gates. They released the prisoners and helped them out, and they were in just really bad condition. They had to carry some of them.
Now later in life, when he returned, he stayed in farming.
Yes.
He and Mary had 2 children.
Yes.
Okay. Then tell us what happened to Preston.
He kept his farm, but the economics changed such that small farms just wouldn't support people. So most of them then, who had the small farms, went to working at a job in addition to the farming. This is what Preston did. And he worked for the State Highway Department. And he was working on one of the great, large, huge tires. And I don't know if it was on a semi, but on some kind of a vehicle. And it exploded and hit him on the head. He did have a hard hat on, but it even threw it off and dented it and this kind of thing. And then just a few months later, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. That
was in what year?
It had to be in 1970. I'm just looking at it the other day. It was 70 or 71, but I think 70.
So about 10 years ago. It's a little later in the evening. We've been talking about your brothers and sisters. We finished with Preston. Next was Aunt Jeanette. What was it like having a little sister?
Oh, I liked it, and I wanted to name her. And I wanted to name her Vera, because the lady who lived up on the Drive Farm, the people who lived close to us had a girl that was about 15 or 16, maybe it was named Vera. And I thought she was so pretty and so I wanted the folks to name her Vera, but they wouldn't. She was Jeanette.
How did they choose the name Jeanette? Do you know?
No, I don't. Mother liked it. She was going to spell it J-A-N-E-T, but then they told her that she would be called Janet. And she didn't want that. She wanted to be Jeanette. No, I don't know where her name came from.
What do you remember about Jeanette as a child? Now, she's how much younger than you?
5 years. She was a little blonde girl.
Blonde?
Bright blonde, complete, like Stephen. And, Mother used to go to Relief Society meeting and places and leave Jeanette. And she thought that she wouldn't cry if she left her and didn't let Jeanette see her go. So Mother would go off into the other room and just walk off. And so then Jeanette would go to hunt Mother and couldn't find her. She'd been about 2, maybe, somewhere along there. And so Jeanette so she wouldn't let Mother out of her sight. Every Sunday meeting, Mother couldn't go up to, Mother was in the presidency, and she couldn't go up to conduct or anything, but what she had Jeanette right with her, because, and Mother didn't realize it then, but later we talked about it, so with our kids from the time Keith and then the rest of you came, were very, very small. We always told you we were going, and if you cried, you just cried for a little while. You always knew.
I see. Okay, and then your youngest brother is Harley.
Yes.
Now he's quite a bit younger, isn't he?
10 years. And I remember when Harley was born. Well, I remember when Jeanette was born. Preston and I sat out. She was born April of 7th, and it was sort of a cool day. We sat out in the kitchen and had the oven door down. We sat on chairs with our feet on the oven door when the doctor was there, delivering her. And then when Harley was born, I was over at Uncle Wilford's, and they came and said, he had a baby brother, a red-haired baby brother. And in this little community of Burton, Arthur and Leonard and I were the only kids in the whole school with red hair. And Arthur's wasn't very red, Leonard and I's was. However, one of the teachers, Herman Waltz, had red hair. But I used to, when I was little, sometimes think, well, I know Mother and Dad do love me, but, you know, I have red hair. So then when Harley was born, here was that cute little red-headed baby, and then I knew. You could love red-headed babies.
Of course, today Harley's a stake president in the Rigby East stake. He went into partnership with Arthur.
Yes. He worked for Leonard. Harley, we all grew up and left home. Well, one other thing about Harley, Dad and I were married in September of 1940, and then in January of 41 we went to California. We stayed 3 years. However, I did come back about 2 years later. And when we left, Harley was 12, early 13, I guess. And I came back when Grandmother Norton, Dad's grandfather's grandmother, died. And I came back and I went in the house and saw all of them and was interested, and lots of people, you know, and I was talking, and here was this tall kid that came in, and I said, well, where's Harley? And they said, over there, and I hadn't recognized him because he'd grown to be, 5'9", maybe 10, 11, with curly hair, and when I left, he used to wear his hair in butch haircuts. I didn't recognize him for a minute.
Okay, well, moving on. Talk some about your childhood.
Oh, we lived in Burton, and I remember, and Uncle lived a mile through the field, and we used to go over there and help in they grew beets. On our place it was hay that they always had. Later on they had beets. We used to in the beets. I remember walking to school. In the winter we'd ride in the sleigh, but in the fall and spring we'd walk, and it was, well, a mile and a half, and then about a quarter of a mile up to the school, maybe. Not quite that far. A half a mile on the one block, and we'd walk over to the east a mile, and then just up a little ways was school. And I remember walking through the puddles, and kicking the snow, and on the way up, after we turned Ben Summers Corner, we called it, there was a big, there's subwater there, and there was a big, we called it the swamp, but actually, I don't suppose it was more than about, 20 by 40 feet or something. Just a sub-hole is what we called it. It was quite a deep hole. And the pollywogs, the frogs, we watched the pollywogs in the spring, the frogs.
Now,
Had an orchard.
You told me that when you used to ride in the sleigh to keep your feet warm.
Bricks, we'd heat bricks, or rocks.
Then put them in the bottom of the sleigh.
Put a towel or something around them, or a blanket, and then you'd put your feet on those, and they'd retain the heat and keep your feet warm.
You lived in Burton until you were 10.
Yes.
And then you moved to?
Roberts till I was 15, and then we moved back to where we live now. Where Mother lives now.
In Lorenzo. When you were in Roberts, anything stand out in your mind there?
Oh, yes. Uncle Wilford's family came out every summer and stayed with us, and we put up hay. In the winter we went to school from the 5th grade through the freshman in high school. In our high school, I think the whole high school had about 60 students.
60, huh? What about in the winter? What did you do for sports and activities?
We'd go down on the canal, which was down at the end of our field, and we could skate. But at that time, you just had those skates that you put on with the key. They had little clamps that went over your shoes. And it wasn't very satisfactory. You just get going and the skate would come off. So it wasn't very satisfactory. But and when we put up hay in the winter, or in the summer, we had flat. They called them slips or bolts, but they were just flat pieces of board with sort of a runner thing, like a sleigh underneath, and they just pulled along the ground. But in the winter, those were marvelous because you sat on those and took the horses out, and then the horses would go around in a little circle, and this thing would, float around. That was fun. And after church, we either went to see some of our friends or they came to see us. It wasn't any television, but then they'd come home. And church used to be 2 o'clock. Afternoon church we had over at house. Or else Sunday school, they'd come home after Sunday school and stay, or else we'd go to their house.
Okay, so from Roberts you moved back to Lorenzo.
Yes.
At age 15. Why did your parents relocate in Lorenzo?
Well, they bought that place, the 40 acres.
Uh-huh.
Went over there and purchased it. And it wasn't really.
What did you do in the summers as a family?
You mean we worked?
Well, on the farm.
Okay.
I'm thinking particularly of your trips to Island Park.
Oh yes, that was later. That was when I was in college.
Oh. What was the story behind that? Why did they do that?
Well, Uncle Wilford again found this fellow who took cows up there, and they milked cows, and then the cows, they sold the milk into Pond's Lodge, and they took cream up to West Yellowstone and sold to these people, and then they'd take it, either make butter or else take it on in and sell it in West Yellowstone. They lived about 8-10 miles out this side of West Yellowstone.
So really you went up and stayed with Uncle Wilford and his family?
No.
Oh, the people lived 8 miles this side
me.
of West Yellowstone.
Uncle, the people to whom we sold the cream.
Yeah.
But out 6 miles east of Ponds. Uncle Wilford didn't ever go up, Mother and Dad and our family went.
You were on the headwaters of Tom Creek.
Yes.
Tell your story about your blow snake.
Oh, there was this great big huge snake and hundreds of little frogs around. And the big old snake wouldn't bother us. We'd see him every once in a while. There was a spring right in our backyard, and they had built a house over it, and we called it the spring house. And one end of it had the board floor, and then the other end of the house, there was about probably 8 feet that didn't have any floor, and that's where the spring came up. It started right inside that house. So we could take the milk and tie it in cans right over the spring, and then it would cool quickly and easily and sour. And then it went out into a big pond, and then flowed down and became Tom's Creek this spring. And this big old snake was around there. We wouldn't see him too often, but occasionally, and we just, weren't particularly afraid of him because he didn't bother us. But you'd hear little frogs start to squeal, and it wasn't a croak, they could really squeal loud. And I'd go out, and there that old snake would have them by one leg or another, starting to swallow them. Well, I'd take the broom and hit the snake till he let the frog go. Saved a lot of frogs there.
And they probably didn't even appreciate it.
No, I don't suppose so. Why? They did at the moment. They'd go and get off in a hurry out of his way.
Why did you decide you wanted to go to college?
Well, I had some cousins. Anna, Uncle June's daughters, Anna and Bessie, who came up and went to Rick's to go to school. At that time, Rick's was a normal school, they called it, and that's about all. There were some other classes, but teachers, they prepared teachers.
Oh.
And 2 years, and at 2 years of college you could teach. And Anna and Bessie came up, and they were considerably older than I. And they stayed with Uncle Wilford part of the time we went to school, and they stayed in Rexburg. And then Mildred, Uncle Wilford's daughter, and we were with them a lot. She went to Rick's and became a teacher, and then Juliet, who was just older than I, did. And I didn't have enough money to go away to school to do anything else, and so I went. And I did well enough in high school that I knew I could handle college.
Who were some of the people you met at Rick's?
Well, I stayed with Arlena Hall. Edna Nelson and Ada Shirley. Edna and I are still friends. We still correspond. We don't get together as much as we should, but with Arlena, we saw a lot of each other.
She became something of your best friend.
Yes. Through all those years until she, what's it been, about 6 years since she was killed in an automobile accident?
Probably 8.
Could be 8.
Yeah. What were some of your extracurricular activities at Regs?
Oh, they had what they called an Omegas club that all the girls belonged to. And the first year, I guess not such a lot, but the second year, we went to dances and this kind of thing. But the second year I was one of the, what did they call them? I don't know, but anyway, I was head of one of those groups. And then they had what they called the PK club and the Alpha Beta club. There were 2 clubs, and I was in the PK club, and in the second year I was president. I didn't start out being, but the president, I was vice president and the president.
Now, Mother, you're a queen of something.
Oh, that was called Girls' Day. That was May, you know, when they invite the mothers to the campus.
Uh-huh.
And they voted on this. This was a vote kind of thing.
And you were a queen of Girls' Day?
Girls' Day.
How many girls were at the school then?
Well, the student body was about 350 probably, and there were more girls than boys. So maybe around 200, 190, 200. So.
How did you meet Reed Borrowman?
Oh, Arlena had a friend. And he was a friend of Arlena's friend. Johnny Wasden, and Johnny Wasden, I saw him on television the other day. He's now not county commissioner. Anyway, he works in the courthouse in Idaho Falls. What would he be? He sets the taxes in this county.
Tax assessor.
Tax assessor in Idaho Falls. I saw him on television.
What impressed you about Dad?
Well, Arlena said he was such a great guy.
She liked him.
Yes, she liked him. She really built him up. And I come to find out later she really didn't know him that well.
He was a trumpeter. Did that appeal to you, or?
No, because he wasn't playing then. He had gone to Rick's ahead of me, and he wasn't going to Rick's.
He was older.
And I didn't know. Well, just a few years, but he didn't finish Rick's, but he was a year ahead of me in school because he was. Well, actually, I guess it was 2 years, because during that time that we were in Burton, they had us take kindergarten. We started at 6 and took a kindergarten year. They were experimenting. And we went to Robert's mother wanted me to go ahead a grade, but I didn't. I went up and skipped a grade, and I could have. So he was.
You were married.
My birthday was January, and his was September, so we started a year earlier than that.
You were married in September
1940.
What were the years like then, for a young married family?
We didn't have a car. He just worked in the sugar factory, and he didn't have a job other than the campaign job. So
Now campaign
was when they dug the beets and brought them in and cut them up for sugar.
Oh.
And this would last from September, the latter part of September, from October about on through Christmas. Usually a 3-month.
So you didn't have a car, and he didn't have a really steady job.
No, just that. But when we got married, we were engaged, and then Leonard and Phyllis were getting married.
Uh-huh.
So we went down to the Logan Temple. So we decided, well, we just as well go down with them. Then Merle and Margaret. Margaret was killed in an automobile accident in 1950.
But all 3 of you were married the same day?
Yes. They had been married in April, but then they went down and went through the temple with us.
Oh, I see.
So my brother and Dad's brother both went through the temple the same day we did.
Huh.
So we have the same anniversary.
Okay, after you were married, you mentioned that you went to California.
That was when the campaign ended. Now we went out and stayed at this, just out of Income. We showed you the house out there, haven't we? That we lived in those first few months after we were married during the campaign time.
Out of
just
Iona. Yukon.
Yukon.
Grandma, would you like me to play some music?
Well, I'm talking to your daddy, and so why don't you wait till after?
Okay, so what was the purpose in the trip to California?
To get work. We lived out there with Reed's mother's cousin's daughter, Virginia Clemens, and her husband lived there, and he got work in the campaign. He didn't have work either. And so he got work in the campaign, and so did Dad, so they said we could live in the back part of that house, so when we go to town for groceries or something, we'd go in with them. But they just had a one-seated car. So we decided to go to California, and we paid the gas and the expenses, and I sat on Dad's lap all the way to California. We got to Reno, his poor legs were so sore, and we got a motel, and the motel was so hot, and I'd get up to turn the heat down because it was so hot, and I'd wake him up, and he would grumble. So it's a wonder we even got there. And then we got to California, and they came home. They didn't want to stay. They didn't get work in the airplane factories. That's what they were going to try to do. See, it was in 41, and World War II started in 42, and so there was this defense building at that time. The airplane factories were hiring. So they came home, but we went up to Santa Maria, and I rode and that's where his uncle lived, his Uncle Reed. His grandmother was there at the time. Now, she wasn't staying with them right at the time we were there. She was some of the other kids in California. But we went up to Santa Maria and went in with them and stayed for, I think, about 3 weeks. And then Dad got work up at San Luis Obispo in the Army camp out of the PX.
When did you buy a gas station in Camarillo?
That was after the war started, and it was in Port Hueneme.
Oh.
Then we went to Ventura, and then Dad, after he had worked out at the PX, he got work at the Shell Oil Company, and they transferred him to Ventura.
Oh, I see.
And so he went down to Ventura, and we lived there, and that's, then we leased our own station out of Port Hueneme. And in the meantime, we were living in San Luis Obispo when, and I remember so well, I walked out of the house, and the neighbor lady, and we rented from her mother. Her mother lived on one side, and she lived on the other, and we were in the middle, in a little house in the middle that had a duplex. And I walked out, and Dad was out of the PX, and it was a Sunday morning, and she called across to me and said that the Japanese had declared war, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and we didn't have a radio. And so I went over to their house and sat and listened to it on the radio.
Now, by this time, had you had any children?
No, that was December, and Keith was born in April.
When did Dad join the Navy?
In San Luis Obispo, what?
When did Dad join the Navy?
Now I'm saying Keith was born in Ventura. Then we went to Ventura, and Keith was born in Ventura. In November of 43. Keith was born in April of 42, and November of 43. If I take.
No. Why don't we take time now? You came back to Idaho. Dad went to work for in an automotive.
He went in the Navy.
I understand. And after the war, you came back to Idaho. He went into the automotive parts business, and you started teaching. Tell us about each of your kids.
I didn't start teaching that soon.
Oh, didn't you?
No. Dad came back, and we moved down and lived right across the river here. We couldn't get any houses. He was here in Pocatello for several months, and finally, and I came down and would hunt for houses, and finally someone told me about these apartments. I got through very happy.
Okay, we were just talking about where Keith was born. Rather than fill in all the details, which most of us are familiar with, why don't you tell us about your kids? Talk about each, the things you admire, things that you remember.
Oh, when you were little?
Well, and then as we've grown up, today.
You were all pretty happy kids as little kids. Keith asked me here a couple of years ago when his kids were arguing, quarreling, and bawling out. He said, "Did we bawl like this?" And I said, "No, I don't remember that we did particularly." So then I went up to bed that night, and I was better staying with him and started to. Today, Keith, I admired his organization when he was young, and I do it today, and he's a wonderful father, and they have a wonderful family. All the little things that the toys, you'd see them on television and you wanted them, but then some masking tape and or some scotch tape and some paper plates and pans out of the drawer and all this, and you'd crayons, and you'd come up with the things,
Huh.
and the bottom toys would stand by the wayside.
As you characterize Keith, what do you think his outstanding ability is?
Oh, I guess organization. He's really good at it.
No, that's interesting because just a moment ago you said he's a procrastinator.
Well, true, on the thing he didn't want to do.
Oh, I see.
And I'm thinking back of the years when he was supposed to have done his homework, and it wasn't done. Sunday night after church, and we used to have church then, 7:30 to 9, or 7:30 to 8:30, 7 to 9, I don't remember. And he'd come home and he'd say, "My Latin notebook is due tomorrow." Well, the Latin notebook was supposed to have been being done over a 6-week period, every night kind of thing. So we drag out the books, and everybody in the family would get busy and help paste pictures and help, and while he did the write-ups, and this wasn't every time,
Yeah.
but just occasionally.
But today he's very well organized.
Oh yes, oh yes. And even then he was very well organized on the things he particularly wanted to do, certainly. In fact, when we were going on trips, this is something that I just remember off the top of my head. Keith, I'd say, "Help me, because we have all this packing to do and all these things to do," and Keith would say, "Tell me what to do." And I'd say, "Well, do this and this and this," and as far as I could think ahead of what I could have him do. And he'd get those done, and we weren't even started getting ready, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So many other things to do. But then he felt he was complete, his work was completed, and he'd go off and do what he wanted. If I told him 20 things to have done, he would have done it. But David would be right by me. "What can I do?" And I'd send him to this back. "Yes, now this is ready to be done, now this and this." And David liked being around you.
He's a people person.
Uh-huh.
As you think of David today, what do you admire most?
David's a good father to Tommy. Really good father. David is basically a very cheerful person. Outgoing and cheerful.
As you think of Wayne, what stands out about Wayne today?
Wayne is a good father too, isn't he? He's good to the little kids.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure, well, all 4 of you are very intelligent people. All of you boys. I admire that very much. You all are all successful, and you are, well, you like people, you like to ride, you like to talk, you like to lead, you enjoy those things.
As you think of Wayne as a child, what comes to mind?
If I could, of the 4 of you, Wayne is the only one that I'd go back and do things differently with. And I wouldn't have started him in school. Until Wayne started in school, Wayne never stopped talking. He used to climb up on your lap, and if you were trying to do something else, talk to someone or something, he'd take your face and hold in your hands, so you had to look at him. Just loved to talk by the hour. And he started school and he just stopped talking. It was just too much. He was too young. Ability-wise, he handled it very well, but his physical, he wasn't ready to do the handwriting.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't ready for the listening, to sit still that long and listen. But obviously he was a very bright boy. When he was in the 3rd grade, his teacher was aggravated at him, and she told me, she said, "I have 90 library books in this classroom," and she said, "Wayne's on them for the 3rd time, and he won't stop. He puts one in his lap while he does a spelling, and he misses on his spelling test just because he's reading a book."
Is that right?
Yeah, so he wasn't ready. And I was home that year. That's the year you were born, and I didn't teach. I just should have kept him home.
Mm.
That I didn't. But when he came here to Pocatello, then he blossomed. Sort of felt he was in Keith and David's shadow in junior high and high school. Well, even in grade school. They'd say, "Oh, you're Keith's brother, you're David's brother." Kind of.
But down here he found his own
That's
niche.
right.
Why did you go into teaching?
Why did I?
Uh-huh. You've taught for how many years now?
I think this was 32. I'd have to count, though. It has to be 32.
What attracted you to teaching?
I told you, my cousins all went into teaching, and I guess I liked it.
Do you still like it? Have you felt that it's been a good career for you?
Oh, surely, you bet. I've been home during the summers when you children were home. Every holiday, when you were out of school, I was home. If I were going to work at all, I think this is the very best thing I could have done because I was home with your children a lot.
When you should have been. You've been very involved, not in politics, but you have been very active in teacher associations. What is it that appeals to you about being on the state textbook committee or on classroom teachers? Or
I liked it. I simply like doing those kinds of things. I like people, and one of the fascinating things to me was my dad's bored with meetings so often, and I don't think I'm ever very bored with a meeting because I'm interested in seeing how the thing unfolds. Could have gone this way or could have gone this way, but went this way because of what someone said or what someone did.
You like that process?
Yes.
Do you like public speaking?
Yes, I was very interested in it for a while, but not so much now. But yes, I went through that process of where I really thought it would be nice to be effective as a speaker.
Huh. Other than Dad or someone in the family, who do you suppose you admire most?
Oh, Jerry, I haven't thought of that one.
Who are some of the people then that you admire very much, and why?
Well, I admire Mother because she was a person who I believe lived in reality. I don't believe she faced things as they were, accepted them. Sometimes she had some really, really hard things that she came up against because financially there were bad years when they didn't have a lot. But even now, when Dad asked her about the Depression, she said, I remember it as, wow, really, really hard. Not having money, and Dad going working a potato seller, hard work day after day. And but she looked back and said to him, no, it wasn't so bad, we got along.
Huh. Who else do you admire?
All of you boys. Well, Dad,
Uh-huh.
certainly. And that's one of the things that attracted me to him was because I felt he was a very intelligent person.
You admire intelligence?
You bet. I do. And all of you children are. And I'd love you even if you didn't have it. It wouldn't make any difference, but that's something I admire.
Uh-huh. We haven't had a chance to talk very much about your dad.
Oh, my dad was a very quiet person, and but he had a fine sense of humor, and very patient and very kind, and all these little sayings, and I'm going to write them for you kids. I started once, and I've lost them. In fact, I gave some to Keith and David that I had done, and then I ran those copies off of all these little stories, and I've told you kids a lot of them, haven't I, through the years that we were disciplined a lot by these little stories.
Oh.
That's all he'd have to say to you.
You knew what he was trying to communicate to you.
That's right, through the stories that he told. He sang. He loved to sing. We'd be out in the field or in the evenings and sing to us. Rounds of songs.
One of the things I sense in your family is what I would probably call a lack of guile. Does it seem
straightforward people?
Very straightforward? Seems to me that there's no intrigues going on, or that you're just basically up front.
I don't believe there were. And I think that probably, as I say, this probably came from Mother. This is the way we were reared. We weren't reared to be competitive. There wasn't competitiveness there that I ever felt, at least. Of course, I was in the middle, and I guess that's a pretty favored position. Plus, I was the oldest daughter, but I have never felt this, and I don't believe the others have. Maybe I don't believe there's a lot of it.
If you were to give people advice on good communication, what do you think it would be?
Oh, what? Give me some ideas. I guess giving people feedback. In other words, you start communicating, you start talking, then clarify so you're sure you're staying within their range and their understanding what you're saying.
Do you think that most people are effective communicators?
No, we probably do a pretty poor job most of the time. I think that part of it is in the listening, that we do not listen.
Uh-huh.
The person who's listening should do their part, and they often don't.
Why do you suppose we don't?
Either we're too busy thinking about what we're going to answer, or else we're egotistical and just thinking of our own things rather than actually giving the other person our attention.
One of the things we haven't talked about is your feelings for the LDS Church. What part has the church played in your life?
Oh, basic. Completely basic. My father, that was his life, was the church. Thoroughly believed in it. We did not work on Sunday. We got your ox out of the mire, and that was all. In other words, you did the chores for the animals, but you didn't work on Sunday. We used to be told that if we sowed on Sunday, that when we got in the next world, we'd have to take that undone with our nose.
That was one of his sayings?
That's one of the sayings that we'd have to do. Well, you just knew Dad and Mother. Mother was converted to the church, and we always knew that she gave up her family and her homeland and all to come here because of the church.
What is it that appeals to you about the LDS Church?
Because it's true. That it is revealed. It has the priesthood. That by being a member of the LDS Church, the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost, if you so desire.
Do you feel that you've had that in your life?
Yes. Many. Oh, yes, always.
Are there any special experiences that stand out to you, special spiritual experiences that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
Yes. Wayne was going on, just getting ready to go on his mission. David had that 57 that he likes so much. Wasn't it the 57 Chevy?
Uh-huh.
And he had got in the car and backed out the driveway and come around to the front of the house and forgotten something. And he flipped the car into gear and came running in, and I was standing clear in the kitchen at the sink, and you know there's this long living room of ours, and I had my hands in the dishwater, and I just had the feeling I should walk, and I just left the sink and walked to the front door and saw his car going across the neighbor's lawn. It had come out of gear, gone over the sidewalk, and was headed toward this house, and I called to him frantically, and he came running, caught the car just before it hit the house, backed it off the lawn, went back into the street, again parked it, and we stood and talked, and no one had even seen it, and he went on his way. And had that hit the house, I'm sure that the money probably that we would have sent Wayne on his mission, maybe we'd even have had to have used it for that. Maybe our insurance would have paid for it, but anyway, I just don't even know why I left that sink. There was no reason to except to get there and catch that car.
Huh. What would you say your philosophy of life is? Do you have something that you think is basic to you?
Oh, surely love of family. The family, and to do your best. To work here, the reason we're here is to work on our salvation. I thoroughly believe that. When we leave here, we'll go back to our Father in heaven.
We don't know this. Hopefully this film won't be used for a long time. But if you were to give some kind of advice to your posterity, you now have, 16 grandchildren?
Yes.
What would you advise them?
Well, again, family is the most important. Stay close to your family. Do the commandments, because that brings happiness. To live close to the church. Do your best in everything that you do. Be happy. Like
What about to those of
like
your
yourself.
What about to those of your family who may not grow up to be active in the LDS Church or the Mormon Church?
For goodness sakes, get active. Join and get going.
Okay.
Let this pumpkin pie rock.
Okay, well, anything else you'd care to add?
For posterity, years and years from now?
Yes.
Yes, I've had a very happy life. I'm satisfied with things as they are now. It's been a good life. We've had some times that weren't so probably a little difficult. But there's never been a time in all my life that there hasn't been always enough food to eat, enough clothes to wear. You never need those kinds of hardships to worry on without the things we need, the actual needs.
Okay. Well, appreciate it.
A lot of my goals.
Have you?
Love all of our children and grandchildren. And I think it's wonderful that Mother's just celebrated her 100th birthday. And today we celebrated Grandmother Borrowman's 86th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So